Hey, this is Enaa, in with you in the fight back, and today I'm going to talk about Mao Zedong's On Practice, one of his most important philosophical works, and what I believe is probably the basis, the philosophical basis at least, for Mao's theory of the mass line. And when Mao talks about Marx's philosophy of dialectical materialism, he says it's composed of two major characteristics. One is its class nature. Marxism takes a clear class stand on the side of the proletariat. Marxism isn't a philosophy of the bourgeois, or the petty bourgeois, or the aristocracy. It's a philosophy of the proletariat. 2. Practicality. I know this sounds rather strange to some of you, but Marxism is theory that is dependent on practice. Theory is based on practice. Theory serves practice. And this may come as a shock to some of you who have only experience with Marxism in, say, its academic sense. And for Mao, Marxism's most important problem doesn't lie in merely understanding the laws of the objective world and being able to explain them. Mao, of course, says these are very important and we need to know what they're doing. No. The most important problem is in applying that knowledge of the objective world, the contradictions that exist therein, to change that world. Now, so we need to know something. And how do we gain knowledge? Well, Mao looks at three levels. The first is, I would call, the phenomenal or the perceptual. And this is where we see something and we see its separate aspects, its external relations of things, and it's rather superficial. Look at it this way. You go to a town, a city, Chicago, New York, London, wherever. What do you see? You see the streets, you see the people, you see the houses, you may go to the markets, you may read a local paper. But you really see separate aspects. You're just getting a superficial, kind of glossy surface image. You're just seeing these really external relations. It's not really that deep. And this is the perceptual stage of cognition. We see the sense perceptions, we have our impressions. And I believe Mao says it's a rough sketch. And you need that rough sketch, because this is rather the basis of rational knowledge, which is the second level. So you need to go deeper. You need to get past the surface, the external relations, and look at the internal relations. So based on those perceptions we have, say of Chicago or whatnot, you need to arrive at a comprehension of internal contradictions, of those objective things, of their laws, their internal relations, the process, how they relate to one another. What's the greater totality? And say, in observing, say, a factory, for instance, and looking at it just on the surface, you may get a certain sense of, people work here, they do this, they do that, they sell the other thing. But then, as you go from that perception, that surface view, and you go deeper, and you look at the internal contradictions, the objective laws, their motion, their internal relations, and you see that process, you eventually come to see a totality. So that factory, or that city, instead of just seeing that factory or that city, you see that city in its larger totality in capitalism, or that factory in the larger totality of the capitalist mode of production. And an example of this rational knowledge would be the Marxist view of capitalism. But Mao is saying knowledge does not stop there. We have these two levels, but we need to go even further. And we have this theory, the Marxist theory of capitalism, for instance. And let's say the theory is absolutely correct, which it is. It doesn't really do anything if it just sits up there on a shelf gathering dust, or if it's just in the academy being debated endlessly without really doing anything. You need to apply that theory to practice. You need to put it in the service of changing the world, in the class struggle. And For Mao's saying, if you want to know revolution, if you want to know capitalism, you got to experience it. You got to get into contact with it. And the example he uses is, if you want to know the taste of a pear, you have to eat it. It sounds so elementary, but think about it. So you have to take part in that revolution. You need to use that theory of capitalism to change the world. Now let's say the theory you've developed through perceptual and rational knowledge, it doesn't exactly conform to what you're looking at. Because if you think about it, man's knowledge can be rather limited, and sometimes unforeseen circumstances develop. So what do? Your theory that you want to apply to change the world isn't quite working out. But you go back, you study it further, you look at it again and again, and then you try to apply it again. And this is experimentation. It's not going to all come at one blow half the time. You're going to have to go back and forth and back and forth. Continual study and this whole process of gaining knowledge. Now let's say your theory is correct. You apply certain ideas, plans, and programs that correspond to that theory to try to effect change in the material world, to try and change capitalism to socialism, for example. Now, results can be achieved, yes? And this process of knowledge is really going to go on pretty much for a while, if not forever. And Mao attacks a certain line of thinking, and we can see this perhaps in your job or in a political party. There are those who come in there, they're one-sided, they're subjective, and they're rather superficial. They don't investigate using this process of knowledge I've outlined. They don't look at the circumstances, the totality, the contradiction. They just kind of bark orders, say, this is what we're going to do, without really investigating. So what happens? You're probably going to fail if you don't really investigate something. But this, in a nutshell, is Mao's theory of knowledge that leads to practice. And I believe that you should, this is again my rather superficial overview of it, but you can read Mao's On Practice, available free online. And hopefully this video will serve as a foundation to my later review of the mass line. This is Enaa. Until next time.